So did my very first video on this YouTube channel about paying off debt, is it still good? Did it age like fine wine, or is this complete trash now? Let's take a look.
Should you be paying off your debt here in 2020?
2020 video,
And
obviously.
so there's a few things to look at. First and foremost, understand that one, it's always about you as a steward. It's always about your own individual situation. It's about who you are and how you show up. And the better the steward you are, the more likely you probably don't need to pay off debt.
Okay, so I open up with stewardship. This is kind of going to the basic principle of this. Very important. Like, who are you? Are you somebody who's going to blow the money and spend it? Debt is not for you. Are you going to be a saver where you freak out having any kind of debt? May not be for you. Or are you going to be a wise steward where you know what to do with that money? So far we're okay.
How much in interest they make or save. But the truth is that when it comes to practicality, right? When it comes to actually how this applies to real life, sometimes having that cash available is way more important than not having the debt payment. Now, granted, I like paying off loans, especially if they're inefficient. And I would turn you towards a past podcast I did last year. It was called The Best Way to Pay Off Your Debt. Kind of a good title. It's episode number 335. And you can check that out.
Find that episode now.
The Cashflow Index that I created back in 2008.
It's like 600 episodes ago. And I forget to teach us sometimes that it's important to have cash on hand. It's more important than having no debt. So think about it this way. Would you rather have $30,000 of cash with $30,000 debt that you're making, say, $1,000 a month on, let's just say? Or would you rather have no cash, no debt? Which one's safer, would you say? Now, most likely you should have said the first one. Now, it may not be ideal. You probably rather have $30,000 cash with no debt. We get that. We all want that. But if you had to choose between the two of no cash, no debt, or $30,000 of cash and $30,000 debt, think about it this way. How long could you keep those payments going? If say it is $1,000 a month, which is pretty high for a payment on $30,000, but say it's $1,000 a month, that means how many months you have? You have theoretically 30 months. That's 2.5 years you can keep making those payments. I learned this firsthand when I was deeply in debt myself, because when I was trying to figure out how to get out of that debt hole, I was playing Cashflow 202, and I would see, like, when I went to negative cash flow, it starts eating my savings. If I wanted to avoid bankruptcy, if I had more savings, if I didn't just try to invest every dollar I had, which is what a lot of people try to do when they play the cash flow game, but instead keep some cash on the side, if you happen to go negative cash flow temporarily, then you're able to weather out that storm. And it might even buy you some time until you can get that back under control. But if you don't have cash, you immediately go negative cash flow, you're bankrupt, just like that, right? Because you have nothing else to fall on. So that's a really good point. I'm glad I brought up in this video that I think you should reiterate for you today, is that, remember, having cash on hand is more important than being debt-free. Every time I've done that, where I've liquidated my accounts to pay off a debt, even though I'm so happy about the debt, something comes up inevitably, like something breaks down, like a car or washer and dryer or something like that, where I need that money back. So be careful. Be sure to use wisdom and use a little bit of balance here. You gotta have a good offense and defense. Now, I also mentioned the Cashflow Index. I'm going to bring up this one too, because this is not in this episode, but I think that's a very important thing to use. If you go on our website, we talk about the Cashflow Index as well. Cashflow Index, you take the balance of your loan and divide it by the minimum monthly payment, and you get an index. So if you had a $10,000 loan, that's $100 a month, the index is 100. If you have a $10,000 loan, that's $500 a month, it's 20. The lower index you pay off first. You don't worry about whether the interest rate's higher or not. You're not even worried about the balance necessarily. You're looking at how much bang for my buck can I get? What's the ROI, the rate of return I can get by paying off this debt based on the monthly payment? I learned this firsthand, again, being broke. And so I brought up that cash flow index because that's very important. We've had so many clients free up literally tens of thousands of dollars a year using the cash flow index in their life, because that is the key to getting it better paid off. So when I tell people ignore the interest rate, I'm serious. Like, don't pay as much attention to the interest rate as you do that balance to payment ratio, which we refer to as the cash flow index. Pay the lowest one first, roll up to the next one, and then to the next one. And to go along with my cash savings example, and this is something that a lot of people that do teach the cash flow index, because they're copying me, because they don't understand, is don't just pay extra payments on everything. See, credit cards make sense because as you make an extra payment, the payment goes down on the credit card. But if you have a car loan, a mortgage, a student loan, or anything that's an installment loan of that sort, where you have to pay it off to free up the cash flow, do not pay extra payments to that loan. Because if you make extra payments to that loan, the payment remains the same, but you just are now out the cash. You're out the cash now. Yeah, the balance goes down, it looks great on paper, but your day-to-day living hasn't changed. So instead, build up the savings to be more than the balance that you owe on that loan. So eventually here's what will happen. You'll pay down the loan gradually as you're making your normal monthly payments. You're building up your savings. You'll get to a point where they're the same, but you will not pay it off here. That's the bad mistake. But then as you keep paying it down, this goes up. Then when you get about here, then you liquidate that to pay it off, and then you still have some savings left over. That's the secret. If you get nothing else from this video, that might make the world of difference in your life right there.
The one thing he talked about is that he said, hey, if on your mortgage, you can get a guaranteed 277% return by paying it down. And so he used an example. He said, hey, I've got a $310,000 mortgage at 4.5% for 30 years. So he says the big lie is that it's only 4.5%, but he's like, it's not true because that first year's of mortgage payments that you're paying, right? And the mortgage payment's almost $1,600 a month. He says that the first year, only $5,001 goes towards principal, while the other $13,800 and change goes to interest. Now, those of us that have had mortgages or any kind of loans, we know that in the beginning, more goes towards principal than interest. And that's completely true. Many people will say that's the evil thing, and that somehow banks are using it to mess you up. And no, they're not. They're not doing it to screw you over, for lack of a better word. But that's what he was saying. He's like, hey, if you just took that $5,001 extra principal you would have paid the first year anyways, throw it extra onto your mortgage, you'll save that $13,848.
I really spend the rest of this video talking about this compound versus simple interest component, right? This kind of principle here. And so what I'm talking about is a guy that's talking about throwing this extra money towards principal and what kind of return would he get? But, and this is based on like a 7% mortgage, right? Or a 7% loan. But do you have to earn more than that on your investments to beat that? So if you said, instead of me throwing the extra towards debt, what if I invested it? Right? That's always the debate. Do I pay off the debt or do I invest it? What kind of return do I need to make on the investments? Most people think you just have to earn the same interest rate as the loan, but that's not necessarily true. And here's where I talk about that.
If you just took that $5,001 extra principal you would have paid the first year anyways, throw it extra onto your mortgage, you'll save that $13,848 in interest. Now I did the math just to double check. I was like, yeah, he's right. And so his argument is, hey, if you do that, $5,001 becomes in 30 years, from that saving of interest over those 30 years, or really just knocks off a year off your mortgage, right? He's saying like what it does right there is that, hey, you've just earned, you've made a 277% return because 5,000 became almost 14,000. Now here's the thing. I said, you know what? That's a good point. Let's figure out if you didn't pay towards that mortgage, what would the return have to be if you did save it instead? So I ran the numbers and guess what? It was just under 3.5%. So even though it's a 4.5% mortgage, because that whole compound versus simple interest, you might hear me talk about.
4.5% mortgage.
What ended up happening is, $5,001 becomes that same number at 3.46% or just over it. So as long as you're earning about just under 3.5%, you win, even compared to his example.
So the whole point of this is that there's compounding interest and there's simple interest. When you pay on a loan, because you pay at least interest only, typically on a loan, right? You don't go negative every month. You actually go in the positive usually. You pay in principal and interest. Well, that's not the same as compounding interest. So if you had that same money and invest it for that same period of time, what will happen is you'll see you have to earn the same amount of interest. And I have plenty of videos showing this, especially with infinite banking and everything else. And even why, if you have a loan on your infinite banking policy, you could actually earn more still, even if that loan rate is a little bit higher than your dividend rate. You can still beat it because you're being paid compounding interest while you're paying back with the cash flow simple interest on that loan. And that's the difference, right? As you pay on a loan, the interest you pay starts going down. As money's sitting there growing, compounding, it starts exponentially going like that hockey stick. They have an inverse relationship. And so if you ever see I show people like a 5-year car loan, if you have a 5-year car loan at 7%, as long as you can take that same money you could have used to pay off that car, but instead put in a CD earning 3.5%, you'll earn about the same amount of interest as you paid over the life of that car loan over 5 years. I know it seems like it doesn't make sense, but it's huge. Again, I already said before, if you didn't get anything else from the video, well, this is another one. This is how the wealthy become wealthier. They realize they can create more leverage with the money they have by being able to borrow and use it as wise stewards, not as spenders, not as somebody who's going to blow the money and consume it, but no, instead of using it in productive ways to create more with it. As long as you know you can be disciplined with it, if you can be like a saver, but somebody who's willing to use it to create passive income, you'll realize pretty quickly you can make a lot more money faster. So it's interesting, I talk about paying off debt. There are some debts you want to pay off right away based on the cash flow index, but then there's other debts you might not want to pay off early on. I personally right now have a 3.9% car loan that I'm not paying off early right now. Why? Because I can make way more than 3.9%. Even though I had the cash to pay off the car loan, because they offered me such a great interest rate, I said, well, I'd rather use your interest, especially with inflation anyways, right? Which inflation is usually about the same or more than that. I was like, I'd rather go and make my money work harder for me while I make higher interest than what I have to pay you. And that's the difference, that I know I pay very little interest compared to what I can make off that same amount of interest. That's the difference. That's how stewards and investors look at money and how they look at debt. You got to shift that around. That's why wealthy people become wealthy, because they shift that perspective and look at debt not as a bad thing, but as a tool if you are wise when you use it. That's the key. 5 years later, I still agree. I mean, obviously I don't record videos quite like that. Sometimes I don't go as much in the weeds, or I try to be more visual with it. But at the end of the day, I mean, principles still work. The strategies still work today. Even if it means I don't invest in the same things, they still work. And so if you want to figure out what's the way you can leverage your situation, should you be leveraging debt? Maybe you shouldn't be. Maybe there's debts we should be paying off. What strategy would work best in your situation? Well, go to moneyripples.com/consulting and book a call and see what you can do today.